So the session is being recorded in case you want to refer back to it later, or for folks who weren't able to make it. We are going to be having questions throughout. So my colleague Hal, there he is. He is going to be managing chat. Incidentally, my name is Christine. I'm doing most of the talking today. We do have an evaluation afterwards. If you guys could fill out, that would be really appreciated. And Hal is going to also have a link in the chat for a online appointment booker. Right. So after the session, if you have questions or you're working on something and you find you need some help, you can book an appointment with any of the health librarians through that tool. So that's pretty handy. Our advertised objectives were as follows, which they basically boil down to how can I use PubMed in the best way possible, right? So using limits appropriately, using some of the features that make things a little nicer for searching PubMed. Now, I know like PubMed is really well known, and it's available to the public, right? It's not something that you need to have a subscription for. So people like to use PubMed a lot. But what's it good for? Because not every tool is good for every job. Well, as far as subjects goes, it is heavy in clinical medicine, right? It's all about biomedical and life sciences. There's also, in addition to the clinical medicine stuff, there's nursing and allied health, there's veterinary medicine, bioengineering, genetics, that kind of stuff as well. So it's fairly broad, right? Which is often very helpful. As far as what's in PubMed, there are kind of three pieces to it. So there's a database called Medline, and Medline records, I did the math in the fall, it's like 86%-ish of what's in PubMed, right? And just to kind of put that in perspective, PubMed as a whole has over 35 million items indexed in it. So it's a lot. It's also a gateway to PubMed Central, and that's a full text repository for journal articles. You may or may not know, a few years back, the U.S. federal government made it a rule that if you got a U.S. federal grant, you had to make your research results available through open access. And so this is one of the repositories that folks who get these grants can use. So that means there's some stuff that PubMed wouldn't normally be indexing as well, right? So sometimes you see stuff that's a little like not biomedicine-y, and you might think, what's that about? That might be why. So that can be good because you'll see things that you wouldn't necessarily see otherwise. But there are some questionable journals that are included as well. And that's just because by virtue of the fact that they got the grant, it's included. The journals themselves didn't go through any kind of vetting process. Lastly, there's also the NCBI bookshelf, and that is a collection of free electronic biomedical textbooks. So if that's what you're looking for, then PubMed is a good tool. Is it good for quick, simple searches? Absolutely. The thing with the databases these days, like a lot of them try to kind of use algorithms and stuff to make searching a little bit easier. As far as that goes, PubMed is the one that works the best for that, right? So that's kind of handy. Sometimes you can get some things that are unexpected as well, but for the most part, it works pretty good. Now, as far as systematic reviews and scoping reviews, I do not recommend that you use PubMed for those types of projects. And it's mostly because of those algorithms I just talked about, right? So transparency and reproducibility is a key feature of a systematic review or a scoping. And because PubMed is kind of massaging results behind the scenes, it's not a case of what you see is what you get, right? So a couple of years ago is when they actually implemented these algorithms. So things that were run in PubMed before then are not going to run the same way as now as they did originally. And I don't know, maybe Hal, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my impression is that these algorithms could potentially change over time, which means that if you did something today, there's no saying for sure that it's going to run, even though you write in the same terms and everything, exactly the same way in a couple of years from now, right? So I always suggest that for that and for a couple of other reasons around like structure and syntax, I usually suggest people use Medline if they're going to do a systematic review rather than PubMed. So are there any questions or thoughts or comments or anything about that before we keep going?
Just feel free to use the chat feature if you want to ask questions at any point as well. Like Christine said, I'll be monitoring that and I'll bring those to the group's attention.
Well, while you're mulling things over, I'll just continue on here. So, oops, too far. Oh no, wait, not too far. Sorry about that. So, as far as accessing database PubMed goes, as I mentioned, it is available to the general public, right? So you could just go on the internet and access it from wherever. But we suggest that you actually go through the library. And the reason for that is because when you go through the library, it recognizes that you belong here at the U of M and you have access to U of M subscriptions, right? So if you did a search on the public site, and I'll show you this in a minute, you might get a result that looks amazing, and there's a little icon that says go to the publisher, and the publisher says you can read this for $35 or however much. Whereas if you go to the library site and go PubMed through the library, you'll still see the publisher icon, but there'll be another icon as well that you can use if this is something that we have access to through the library, and it doesn't cost you a thing. So it's just a little more convenient that way. All right. So, being as it's Valentine's Day, we're going to start off with a sample search about whether eating chocolate affects people's mood, right? So in healthy adults, does eating chocolate affect their mood? Our minds want to know. And whenever we do a search, we always kind of have to think about the components of our question, right? So in this case, there are two pieces, right? There's chocolate and there's mood. And we always need to kind of think of different synonyms, right? Like I said, PubMed will do some massaging of the search on behind the scenes, but for the most part, depending on what it is you're looking for, it's not necessarily going to be a complete search if you don't look for similar ways that people talk about the same thing, right? So chocolate's pretty straightforward, right? So we've got chocolate, there's cocoa, there's also cacao, I believe that's how you say it. And on the other side, we've got mood, but we could also say, well, I want to look for mood, but that's related to like things like anxiety or happiness, so like specific moods, right? Depending on exactly how broad or focused you want to be, you want to think of all the different terms that you would look for to find your topic, right? On my screen here, in my little brainstorming list, I've got a couple of things to note. Things like mood and emotion have a little asterisk behind them. And we do that to look for variations in the word ending, right? So like emotion, asterisk, anything after the end doesn't matter. So it would pick up on things like emotions, emotional, stuff like that, right? So I don't have to try and think of every different iteration of that word. I've also got some phrases, right? So negative affect and positive affect, right? In the psych lingo, they talk about affect instead of mood. So when you have more than one word, so negative space affect or positive space affect, to look for that as a phrase, you need to put it in quotation marks, right? Otherwise, it's gonna look for negative and it's gonna look for affect, but it's not gonna look for them like necessarily beside each other, right? So some different things can happen. And I'm actually going to demonstrate the difference, right? So you're thinking, that seems weird, but it is true. So in order to get to PubMed, I'm going to start at the library site, and I'm going to go to databases A to Z. a big list of databases, and I'm going to search for PubMed. And right here at the top, I've got PubMed, so I can click on that. There I am, right? So just to demonstrate the difference between quotation marks and no quotation marks for a phrase, I'm gonna do a search, right? So let's start with positive. Make this a little bit bigger too. So I've got 216,136, which is a lot. If I put quotation marks around positive affect, I'm down to 7,475, right? And so you can see in this group, it's more focused, right? And I've got positive affect kind of highlighted here in bold, so I can see that that's what it's looking for. If I wanted to go back to the other set of results, I can do that, right? I've got my advanced search link here, and I can see everything that I've done in the advanced search, right? So number 1, number 2, and I can switch back to the first one, right? And so in this case, number 2 has positive affect as a phrase, but I'm not seeing it in number 1, right? So, you know, it's not exactly doing the same thing just because of the way I typed it in. Makes sense to everybody? Any questions or problems? Off there. All right. So let's do our search. All right. So I'm going to go back to the main page. Right. So I've got my search terms. I'm going to do chocolate, cocoa, and cacao first. Right now. Oh, actually, before I do that, I'll point out when we have multiple terms, we connect them in different ways. Right. So anything that refers to the same idea, I'm going to connect them with an or. Okay. So I'd take chocolate, I'd take cocoa, I'd take cacao, right? Likewise with the emotion stuff, I would take any of these terms here. Okay. When we're connecting terms that are different, we connect them with and. So chocolate and mood, not just mood, not just chocolate. They both have to be there, right? Now it's also important to keep your ands and your ors separate, right? There are some ways to combine them, but that starts to get a little complicated. And I'll demonstrate the difference between the two approaches as well, just like I did with the quotes versus the not quotes, just to show you what happens. So let me go back here. I'm going to do each concept separately, right? So got chocolate. Search for that. And there's like 10,643 things that have these words in there. Right. So next, I'm going to do my mood. And rather than do all the ones that I identified, I'm just gonna pick a few. So I'm going to do mood asterisk, so I can get mood or moods, or affect. And so I've got my quotation marks around my phrases. So it's going to look for negative space affect. It's also going to look for positive space affect. And I've got my individual terms connected with or, right? Because I would take articles that have mood, that have negative affect, or positive affect. When I look for these terms, there's like 130,000 that have these particular items in them. Okay. So now I have to combine these two together, right? Because those individual searches are still individual, right? It was one concept at a time. And so to do that, I'm going to go back to my advanced search. See all the things I've done so far. And in this query box here, where it says enter, edit your search query, I'm going to say I want number 3, which was my chocolate, and I want number 4, right? So whatever comes back has to have terms from both of these groups. Search. So I'm down to 119. It's not too shabby, right? Pretty easy to kind of go through and scan, right? Look at the titles. If the titles look good, read the abstracts. If the abstracts look good, then I can read the articles. So let's say that I like the looks of number 2. I'm going to click on that. So when I go to the additional information, I've got the abstract, so I can read more. If I keep going, it's also got a list of similar articles, right? So if I find something, get rid of that. If I find something that is just like perfect for my topics, like 100% what I want, I can see if there are similar articles, what the database considers to be similar articles, and kind of follow the breadcrumbs that way, right? I mentioned that there was that option to access full text, right? So this one, it looks like this is the publisher theme. It looks like they have a free version online, but this is online full text. I don't know if you can read that very well. When I hover over it, it says see full text options at U Manitoba Libraries, right? So I could use either of these. I go back to my search results. I'm going to pick one that I think might not be free. Yeah, number 3. Let's do number 3. Right. So if I click on number 3's title, this one's from Oxford Academic. Right. So if I click on that one, oops, on that one, this is the publisher site. We'll see if this is going to prompt me to pay. I am at the library, so it might recognize where I am. Just give me a second here. This one, we've got the little unlock signal here. It says purchased. So that tells me that it understands that I'm coming from the U of M library. Oh, and if I look in the URL as well, you can see here it says UML, University of Manitoba Library. So in this case, it's just automatically recognized it. I'm not doing too well for my demonstration purposes here. Let's try this one. One more. Okay, so Elsevier is full text. That's the publisher. This time I'm just going to click on this one right out of the gate. The online full text. And it says access is provided by the University of Manitoba Library. And so I can download the PDF. I can also download a link, I guess, if I don't want to see it right now. And I can, but if I get my PDF, I can save it to my computer, refer to it later, that kind of thing. How does that grab everybody? Are there any questions so far?
Yeah, I do have a question for you. I'm not sure if I wasn't following at the time. Maybe you mentioned it, but I just want to ask, why did you asterisk mode and you just like the negative affect and the positive affect was in quotation?
So when we have words that could end in different ways, so in the case of mood, you could look for mood, you could also look for moods, right? Okay. Wherever you put the asterisks, that tells it just stop looking here, right? So that way, if you were to look at, I don't know, what's another good example? Something like teenagers, right? So you could have people talk about teens, talk about teenager, you can talk about teenagers, right? So if you put the asterisks at the end, right? So teen, it's going to get all the different endings. You don't have to be like teen or teenager or teenagers.
Okay.
It's kind of a handy shortcut, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Good question.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else at this point? Well, then let's keep moving. All right. So we did our search, kind of straight up search. I think it went pretty well. If I go back to my results, I can refine things a little bit more though, right? So you might have noticed along the side here, there were some options for limits, right? And so, for example, if you had reason to limit by date, for example, see, like the earliest item that fits this particular search was 1984. I could move that though. I could say 2000 to present as an example, right? Usually when we, yeah. Okay. Usually when we limit by date, we want to have a reason. And like a reason that's not, I don't want to look at that many things, right? So if, for example, there's been a change of practice, that's a really good justification for imposing a date limit. If you're doing an assignment and the assignment says only include things from the last 10 years, well, you always got to follow the instructions for your assignment, right? So then you could say last 10 years. Some other stuff to look at. I always like to point out, it suggests looking for full text, but please don't, because not necessarily going to work very well. Like sometimes when you're in another database like CINAHL or PsycInfo or what have you, you'll see links to things, but that's links to things from the same vendor, and the vendor doesn't know what we get from other vendors, right? So it's the whole reason we have that little button on the side to check library access, right? It seems like the most natural thing in the world to say, give me the full text, but I suggest that you don't. Okay. Likewise, you can say you want particular types of studies, maybe like you want randomized trials or something. Maybe you want to say you want to limit by age. Option, but we don't see it here, right? But we've got additional filters. So if I click on that, I can see what the different filters are. So for example, article types, there's all kinds of article types. We've got, for example, humans versus other animals, right? Languages, if you want to be able to limit to specific languages. I had mentioned age, so you can have all kinds of breakdowns of age, right? I'm going to say I want to see child, which is birth to 18. I want young adults, which is 19 to 24, and middle-aged, 45 to 64, then aged, which is 65 and over, right? And so down in the corner, it says show. So this doesn't mean that it's now doing the limit automatically. It's just showing it on the side. I still have to check it off. So I could say I want anyone who is 65 and older, and I want 45 to 64, right? So you can see these are checked off on the side, but now it's down to 33 results, which is not that many, really. But in my question, I was talking about healthy adults, right? So that's one way to narrow things down a bit. Any questions about the limits? Okay. Wonderful. So let's move on then. Okay, I'm going to go back to the main page, and we're going to do a search using something called clinical queries, right? So if we scroll down the page, we've got a whole bunch of options, and one of them here is clinical queries. And clinical queries is designed kind of for that busy clinician, right? They just need a few good articles, not a lot of time to put in like a super complicated search. And again, like I said before, there's some stuff going on behind the scenes for this one as well to try and narrow down to particular types of articles, right? So right now you can see where it says filter, the default is therapy, but we could also say, you know, I'm interested in prognosis or diagnosis, something like that, right? And it's going to narrow down the results to include clinical studies that relate to these particular items. Okay. We also have scope, broad or narrow. The idea of broad is that you want to be inclusive. So you don't want to risk missing something. So you might get a few things in there that aren't quite what you're looking for. Whereas narrow is to try and have the smallest, most focused set of results possible. There's less to go through, but then you might miss something as well, right? So those are the trade-offs. Broad, you might have more results to look through, but there's some noise in there. Narrow, the results are small, but it's more focused, right? Less chance you're going to get stuff that's not relevant. So let's say I'm interested in naproxen for back pain, right? So I can type in naproxen, and these are two different concepts. I'm going to connect them with and. So it has to have naproxen, it has to have back pain, and back pain is a phrase. So I'm going to put that in quotation marks. Right. I just hit search. And then as results for clinical studies, therapy / broad, I've got 77, right? And so it shows me just a handful. And if I want to, I can see the rest by clicking on see all results in PubMed. This first one here, it's got square brackets, and that tells me that it is not written in English, right? And actually, if we look, it even says a little further down that this one is in Russian. We've got some other stuff as well. Some of them are labeled as free PMC articles. That's that PubMed Central I was talking about earlier, right? So that's the full text repository. But if I wanted to, I could see all results in PubMed, right? And I can do my filters again, right? So if I wanted to say, I only want systematic reviews, for example, there's actually 4, right? And we can tell that the systematic review is on because it's got this little highlighted bit at the front, right? So only systematic reviews. And actually, if we were to do another search, it's going to keep this this particular filter, right? And unless we turn it off. So just something to keep in mind. So we've got one about management, back pain with and without sciatica in the emergency department. I can't speak. Sorry, sumatriptan plus naproxen, right? For migraines, that's interesting. And then opioids for chronic low back pain. So that's pretty straightforward, right? It uses a similar structure, right? So we've got our and connecting our different ideas. We use quotation marks for the phrase to look for backspace pain. And it's a fairly simple search, right? So it's quick, it's fast, fairly easy, right? Aimed at that busy clinician. Now, earlier I had mentioned that we don't want to mix our ands and our ors together, right? So I had my ORed things in one line, I had in my other ORed things in this other line, and then I combine them afterwards. If I was going to say, I don't have time for that, I need to be careful about mixing my ands and my ors. So if I were to just take those terms, just copy and paste from the side here. So cocoa, or pardon me, chocolate or cocoa or cacao. Got my mood terms, mood or negative affect or positive affect. I have 196. Oh, and that's actually, I just told you that it keeps the filters on until you turn them off. Filter limited to systematic reviews, so I'm going to clear that. I'm up to 16,669, right? That is a very different result than my 119 from before. Right? So it is not doing the same thing here as it did earlier. Right? And that's because when it does the search string, when it processes it, it's just moving from right to left. And if you're thinking about it logically, you're saying, I want this one, or this one, or this one plus this one, or this one, or this one, right? Which is a very different answer. So this is just kind of to drive home that if you're going to be doing something that's a little more complicated, you want to keep your concept separate. and then add them together afterwards. That makes sense to everybody? Always an acceptable answer.
Yeah, it makes sense. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right. So, add a couple more things that we wanted to talk about today as well. So we did the basic searching. We did clinical queries. I also wanted to talk about single citation matcher. So I'm going to go back to the main page for that. Right. And single citation matcher was underneath clinical queries in the find right here. And this is handy if like someone's told you about this awesome article that you got to read, but you don't have all the information, right? Yeah, like how do you find it, right? So as an example, let's say that my colleague Hal here, who's working in the chat, he was an author on a great article about whether seniors go walking outside, right? I know that it was published last year. I know his name. I know it had to do with walking. How do you find that, right? Well, single citation matcher is helpful. I don't know the journal, so I'm going to leave that blank. I know that it was last year, so I can put 2022. I don't know about the month and the day, so I'm going to leave that too. So I can look up Hal. So Hal's last name is Lowen, Loewen. First initial is H. I'm actually going to just stick with H. I could say Hal, but Hal might be short for something, and there could be another Hal out there, right? There's some HR, HJ, right? I'm not really sure, so I'll just stick with H. Oops. Quite what I wanted to do. Let me go back. I hit enter a little too early. And I know it has to do with walking, so I'm going to look for walking in the title. So now I'm going to search, and look at that. Factors associated with outdoor winter walking in older adults, scoping review. Right. So I've got Hal listed here, and I can double check to see that that's the real Hal. Right. If I go on to affiliations, this is Neil John McLean Health Sciences Library. That's the guy. Right. So this is the article I was looking for. So I can read more about the item itself in the abstract. And then if I wanted to, I could go to the side and go to my online full text to get the actual article itself. Earlier I had accidentally did the search without walking. So if I just to see the difference, there are 4 things, right? So I've got something about COVID. I've got something about telerehabilitation. And I've got some stuff about interventions to improve physical and mental health in older adults. So not a huge list. I could pick out the right one from here. But depending on what you're looking for and if you have the author, if you don't have the author, all that kind of stuff, it's usually a good idea to include as much information as you can. So quick question for the group. Is that a feature that you guys could see yourself using? Just type something in the chat, or yes? I have someone say yes. Yeah, excellent. People have said yes, so that's great. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty straightforward. So we've kind of checked off another item from our list of things to talk about. The last thing I believe we're going to talk about was accounts, right? So personal accounts. If you are going to be doing a lot of searching, or maybe there's a topic that you're going to kind of come back to, several times. So maybe, for example, if you're a grad student and the topic of your thesis is something you're going to be, running a search for periodically, or maybe you just want to kind of keep up on what's new coming out, right? The personal accounts are handy because it lets you save searches. It also lets you do search alerts, right? So for a particular search, it'll email you when something new has been published. So that's kind of nice. These particular accounts are not connected to the library, right? So you do have to create an account with the database, right? So PubMed has its account. If you use something like CINAHL through EBSCO, EBSCO has an account, right, that is separate. So depending on where you like to search, right, you might need more than one. But for PubMed, if we go up to the top corner, we've got this login. Click on login. It says third-party login is now mandatory, and it gives you a whole bunch of options, right? So if you have an ORCID number, you could tie your PubMed login to that. Got some more options though here, and we can actually tie it to our U of M login. So university. Oops. Right, so in our list, we got University of Manitoba, Canada. Click on that. I can now sign in, right? So if you didn't have a login, you would need to create one, right? So you would do that under sign up. Right? Then you would pick which one you want to use. I have one, so let me just go back and log in. Manitoba. First, we've got password. Verify using Duo. So hold on a second while I do that. I'm a university employee, so this method makes sense for me. If you think you would want to use PubMed outside of the U of M, so after you graduate, that kind of thing, you might want to use a different mechanism, right? So like ORCID ID, for example. Okay. So now up in the corner, you can see it says Nielsen C. That's me, Christine Nielsen. And I don't know if you noticed, but there was no highlighting before. Now the last name Lowen is highlighted because that's one of the terms I look for. And that's something that I set up in my account. So if I go to my account and to account settings, right, you can see, oh, I take it back. Preferences, here we go. Preferences page. And I can say, I want the terms that I look for to be highlighted yellow, right? I can also say if I want particular filters to show up on the side, because there's kind of a standard list, but I can say which ones I want. So I can look in this little box on the right. So English is one that I have set. I can also say, well, I want to see the humans filter and have that option to just check it off there, right? So rather than having to go look for stuff every time, it's just there. You can also make a custom filter your own. That one's a little more complicated, but basically what you would do is create a search string, right? So as an example, if I am interested in trauma-informed care and everything I look for has that lens to it, I could create my own like little filter with search terms related to trauma-informed care, and then it's going to show up on the side, and I could just look for, you know, maternity care or whatever it is, and then apply that filter. As it is right now, I have a bunch, and I'll go back to the main page. Window? I don't think it did. Well, that's okay. I'll show you in a second. Back at the dashboard for my account, right? So I've got my filters showing up here as well. It's also got my saved searches, right? So I can see, for example, I did a search in 2016 for Botox for hyperhidrosis, right? The last time I ran it was 6 years ago, and there are 11 new things, right? So I can click on that, and it is going to run it for me. So here are the new things that came up since the last time I did it, right? I've got my highlights going. And incidentally, my format is different because I always want to see the abstract. So that's something I had checked off. It's like, always show me the abstract because, you know, I'm lazy. I don't want to click through everything. Those filters that I talked about, my filters that I came up with that I want to see all the time, that's these ones here on the side, right? So there's one for children, there's one for things that are in English, there's one for guidelines, humans, links to PubMed Central, etc. You can actually see in the search box, this is what it looked for. Those were my terms. And in the advanced search, because I ran it, is what it's done. Right? And I've got my 11 results, and it's saved it, it's run it with the time limits because it's the most recent, right, since I last did it. How are you guys feeling about all of this? Is this like too much, too fast, or you're just so excited about the potential of saving your searches?
It's very nice. I can't wait to start using it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go. That's nice. Any other questions or comments?
I do have a question.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm just seeing something like mesh now.
Yes.
Like, how can we use that mesh?
So I didn't use mesh earlier because this is just kind of a basic intro. Mesh is what we call subject headings, right? And subject headings are tags. Based on what the article is about, it's going to be assigned particular tags. When you just do a keyword search, like you just type some terms in the box, PubMed actually is going to look for appropriate tags and apply them themselves. But you can say, I specifically want these ones, right? So if we look at these articles, I'm going to proceed to details for this one, right? So we're back kind of in that similar view we saw before with the abstract and everything. This one's got some figures. That's kind of fun. Similar articles. If we keep going, these are the tags, right? So it's been tagged with botulinum toxins type A, therapeutic use, forehead, humans, hyperhidrosis, injections, intradermal, quality of life, and treatment outcome, right? So you can look for these tags, but like I said earlier, it will still kind of look for these things, even if you don't specifically look for them. And did it get rid of, because I logged in, did it get rid of my previous, it did get rid of my previous searches about chocolate and stuff. But so super quick, I'm going to recreate that here. Okay. So in my original search, I had my terms. So, oops, 3, 2, 4. I had my 119. That sounds right. If you look in the advanced search, there's this thing that says details, right? So I can see, if I click on that, how it has searched for this. So it's looked for these terms in all fields, right? So anywhere in the item record. In this one, it's actually done some translation for me, right? So it has looked for chocolate as a mesh term. So mesh includes one chocolate, right? So it's done all of these kind of translations for me in the background. So it is including the mesh term. No, I didn't look for it specifically. Does that kind of clear things up, or does that make it worse?
Yeah, it's good. Thank you.
Yeah. So I have a question. Someone was asking about copying and pasting. I guess I can give you this one here. I think that was for hyperhidrosis. Is that correct? Okay. So you look at this one, the, basically all I've done is I've looked for the mesh terms. I've looked for the term all fields. That's just looking everywhere, right? I've used quotation or not quotation marks. I've used asterisks with sweat. Weird that it's got quotation marks around that because that's, do you know what that's about, Hal? It's in my original search. It looked for sweat truncated, and then in the kind of translated thing, it has sweat in quotation marks.
I've seen that sometimes in search results. Like that's just the way that the database processes those title abstract type of searches. It just dumps it into quotation marks. I'm not sure why.
Is it actually is it actually doing what it's supposed to do then?
Yeah, sometimes it shouldn't. When you add the wildcard asterisks, that should automatically turn off some of the other features of it. But yeah, no, I'm not exactly sure because I'm looking throughout your entire search and it's like it has it all over the place for humans, for letters, and you see it everywhere.
Yeah, and it's
a feature of the database itself,
okay.
Obviously, but
yes.
I wouldn't sweat
it. See what you did there. Okay, so we're just going to pretend that this is not concerning to me at all, because it still apparently seems to work, right? It's got 11 things. This is one of those searches that was done before they did the switch, so I don't know if that would have anything to do with it or not. But like you say, Hal, if it's just something it seems to do now, then maybe we won't worry about it. Yeah. Weird. So there you go. I'm going to. All right. Any other questions at this point? We are at 5 to 1, so we're coming to the end of things. While you're thinking, I don't know, Hal, if you want to maybe put the links to that evaluation and stuff in the chat, that would be great. Any other questions from anybody?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I just want to ask where we can access the recording of this presentation.
So I can send it out to you folks. There is a little bit of processing that has to happen before I do that, so it won't be like right away, but it'll come. And then also on, like, the library has a YouTube channel, so it'll go up on there.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Good question.
Christine, I was wondering, I don't know if you touched on it, about displaying the results. There's a couple of different ways you can do that in PubMed, and what the difference between the two are, between most recent and best match.
Right. Okay, so I wonder if it'll mess things up if I log out. I'm going to log out. Okay. Okay, interesting. So if I go to my chocolate and mood stuff, right? So right now, if you look at the kind of top-ish, sorted by best match. So this is what it thinks is most relevant. Whether or not that's the case, it's hard to say. Sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't, right? If you click on display options, you can change that, right? So you can say, I want to see the most recent, or I want to see things grouped by publication date. So that could be, I guess that's maybe in the opposite order of most recent. You can also have all the stuff from the same journal together, right? So if there was like 7 different articles from the New England Journal of Medicine, you could have them all as a group, right? So you can change things that way. Also, right now, you get set to abstract, right? So the original search I did, that one was summary, right? So we could see more things, but we didn't have all the details. If you go to display options and say, I want abstract, it's going to show you more, right? So you can see the abstract. Like I said, I'm lazy. I want to see the abstract. I don't want to have to click all the time, right? Other options are PubMed, right? And this is what you would use if you were going to save it and then put it into a reference management software like EndNote or Zotero or something like that, because it's got all these field codes here. So AB stands for abstract. So the program knows to put this stuff here in the abstract field and so on, right? Back, the other last option was PMID, right? And so this just gives you the ID numbers for these articles. So maybe you don't want to have all of the, the authors and the titles and all that stuff. You just want to make a note of these particular articles for later using the number. You can do that.
Yeah, no, I was going to add that sometimes you can also, you only have 10 displayed at a time. If you have a lot of results to go through, you might want to change that to a higher number. So in the field of display options.
Was that in display options?
Yeah.
Oh, there it was too. Look at that.
So if you change that to, then you have less pages, well, the PMID numbers, but yeah, you have less pages to go through. So it just might make it a little bit easier.
Yeah, no, for sure. So is it going to do it now? It's thinking.
Good. Yeah.
Basically, it's going to show us all of them because there's less than 200, but that's fine.
Right.
Yeah.
And it forces you to screen more than one page. We sometimes have Google Brains and we only look at page 1 and 2, but the really good articles may be further down. So
yes, absolutely. 200 is not that many. Just saying. But yeah, that's a good point. Thanks for bringing that up, Hal. Okay. Well, if there aren't any other questions, we can wrap it up for today. Thanks for coming. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you at another one of these sessions in the future.